Hey guys, have you ever played this obscure indie game called Overwatch? Please don't go, it's a fun game, I swear. I don't think it's any secret that I've been enjoying myself with Overwatch, that one Blizzard shooter with the very attractive characters. This is a game that I'm mixed on because it has a lot of glaring issues when it comes to factors like gameplay mechanics, map design, balancing, the game's competitive potential, and so on, but if that's the case then why can't I stop playing it? As of writing, I'm level 430 with around 300 hours clocked across all game modes, and past its flaws, I still see Overwatch as an addictive game that rightfully deserves its popularity and thanks to its character design and team-based gameplay. So many playable heroes with unique playstyles that there's a fit for everyone, and I'm a Symmetra main. Welcome to Guru's Corner, gentlemen. For today we discuss an interesting topic relating to the game's mechanics, with Overwatch, Symmetra, and the support role. Oh, this is gonna get messy. Symmetra. As far as the game is concerned, Symmetra is classified as a support hero, the role in the game that provides buffs, debuffs, and utility to players on the field to make their lives a bit easier. The most straightforward element of support is healing, a hero providing healing to keep their teammates healthy, pretty basic stuff. So cast your mind to Blizzard headquarters during Overwatch's development, where after raising their nose from a pile of cocaine only WoW subscriptions could amass, some unpaid intern just upped and said, "A support hero that can't heal." Symmetra was an odd, controversial hero from the start because she's a support builder. As opposed to having that overrated Lucio bloke keep everyone healthy, Satya Vaswani of Vishkar makes use of placing structures around the map as opposed to using more instant and direct abilities. Even back in the game's beta, Symmetra was certainly an unconventional sight to behold, but she was also niche and situational as a result. Nobody knew what she was for, nobody knew how to use her the most effectively, and nobody knew why she was a support hero in the first place, so it primarily led to your teammates getting shifty if you picked her as opposed to a second healer. Some of that stigma changing in December 2016 somewhat as Symmetra got buffed, and sim mains of the world, including myself, responded with something along the lines of But before we go any further, start taking notes because we're getting to the fun part, stats and metadata. Okay, just stick with me on this. Pretty please? Sentry turrets. Symmetra pins a 1 health turret onto a surface that when an enemy enters a 10 meter range, launches a beam that slows by 25% of their walking speed and deals 30 damage per second, or DPS. She has 6 turrets on standby, can have 6 on the field at once, and when one is used up, takes 10 seconds to regenerate in her inventory. This means that if an enemy were to walk into a setup of all 6, they would be slowed immensely and dealt 180 DPS. An immense amount if we consider that most offense and defense heroes, or just generally referred to as DPS heroes, start with just 200 health. The Photon Barrier. Symmetra casts a barrier with 1025 HP that sports an oval shape. This provides a trade-off where the barrier is versatile for both personal use and group protection, but sacrifices having more control due to it floating in a straight line on its own and possessing a lengthy cooldown of 10 seconds. But of course, there's Symmetra's most well-known ability, her ultimate, which can be either of two things: a teleporter with 6 charges, or a shield generator that provides an extra 75 HP to teammates' health pools provided they're in a 50 meter radius. It's also important to note for those unfamiliar that this is shield health, a blue variation that recharges provided the user has not been damaged for more than a second. Symmetra herself has shield health from the get-go, 100 in fact, meaning the leftover 100 of her pool is standard health that can be lowered permanently and require a healing source. But let's be honest for a second, this is all the boring shit. I'm fairly certain players have fond memories of the Vishkar patented demon spawn gun, the photon projector. This weapon is easily the most controversial factor of Symmetra that leads to her being an immensely polarizing hero in the Overwatch community. The projector is fitted with a homing beam that once fired locks onto an enemy within a 7 meter range and does not detach until the target either leaves Symmetra's field of view or stands further than the 9.5 meter detachment range. And here's where things get a little bit weird stat-wise. When the projector is initially locked onto a target, it deals 30 DPS. For every second the projector remains locked on, the damage levels up, doubling the previous value, meaning at level 2 the gun deals 60 DPS, and at its maximum of level 3 the gun deals a whopping 120. It's also worth noting that the projector stays at its current level even when detached, but for every second it remains detached drops level by level. If we remember that most DPS heroes started around 200 HP give or take, this means that a Symmetra that locks on at level 1 can kill a squishy in the space of 3 seconds, and if a Symmetra is fast enough can chain this level 3 onto another target to continue dealing that damage. Yeah, nice support hero you have there, Blizzard. Additionally, this means if Symmetra were to lock lock onto a target at level 1 that's already being targeted by 6 of her turrets, she is dealing 210 DPS, all by herself without assistance from her teammates, some concerningly large numbers. And lastly, we have the ult fire that everyone forgets exists. When holding down right click, Symmetra is able to charge an energy ball that drifts away from her at around 10 meters per second, and deals around 26 to 125 DPS depending on how long it's been charged for. This orb has no physical properties, so while it breaks when it hits a wall, it can pass through barriers and even other players to stack damage. So we're done with the numbers, and so far Symmetra sounds like a complete demon that melts everything in her path, but would I say she's an overpowered force to be reckoned with? Not exactly, at least depending on the context. Turret nests more often than not come across as minor annoyances rather than microwaves of death, and provided there are no teammates or additional distractions around, a basic car wash can be destroyed in an instant and take ages to set back up. If we take a look at the stats again, the 1 HP each turret holds means they can get knocked down by the dullest of things: flashbangs, sleep darts, stray explosions, and if we remember the 10-second cooldown per individual turret, this means a full nest is going to take Symmetra an entire minute of waiting. So that's 180 DPS completely shut down. Now, does Symmetra maintain viability through her projector alone? Yes and no. Symmetra's projector for me is only really a support weapon that capitalizes on scenarios where Symmetra already has the upper hand. Scenarios like the state of her buildings, who she's encountering, and whether or not enemies are paying attention to her. Yes, she doesn't have to aim exactly, but how many seconds does it take for her to kill a squishy DPS hero? 3 whole seconds? Just like the 10 seconds per turret regeneration, 3 seconds is a shit ton of time by Overwatch standards that leaves Symmetra incredibly vulnerable. Anna's sleep dart puts you to sleep for 5 seconds, and it feels like an eternity of waiting for death. A lone DPS hero with decent aim or a group of 2 or more that's ganging up on a Symmetra can kill her in significantly less than 3 seconds. She's a 200 HP hero with ship mobility that does a lot, but that's because a lot can take her, and running and holding left click is just a one-way ticket to getting your face caved in by the nearest tank. This countering is even more apparent if you've given Symmetra a go in the recent 8-player free-for-all mode, where without caution, she can be shut down by any McCree or Junkrat in her radius. And this is all without going into hero counters. A fair amount of squishier heroes melt on sight, but Symmetra can be made completely inoperable for a large portion of the match if an enemy is playing as any one of half the roster, most notably tanks with armor. Unlike most counters where it just makes playing as the hero difficult, Symmetra has counters that could potentially shut her down completely and force her to switch if the counter is persistent enough. To give you a few hints, there's this ape called Winestone that's like Symmetra but with more health. We also have heroes like Window Cleaner, Hand Soap, Very Far Away, and retired American champion Thoroughbred Racehorse, who never need to take a step within the projector's 7-meter range to make her kiss the pavement. Symmetra for the most part is balanced around how the builder is supposed to play in a shooter. Rather akin to Torbjorn, Symmetra relies on setup, positioning and planning, and is only overpowered if you allow her to be. Without turrets, she's fucked. Without an ultimate, she's fucked. Without teammates, she's fucked on a plate of curry. This is support targeting 101, I'm afraid. What I'm basically saying is that everyone has the right to be confused as hell about Symmetra's role in the game. She's an enigma, to say the least, and not only are we unsure what she's capable of, but we're unsure what she's supposed to be capable of, and what actually counts as an unbalanced hero in the eyes of Blizzard. But I can still stand here, hand on heart, believing that Symmetra is, has been, and always will be a support hero that relies on her team to compensate for her shortcomings, while she compensates for theirs. Symmetra, in my mind, is not an initiator, she's a capsulizer. She doesn't make a situation good, she only makes it better, which is not what a standard DPS hero does. If you have bad tanks, holding out for long periods of time is going to be tricky. If you have bad healers, staying alive is going to be pretty taxing. But having bad DPS heroes is the equivalent of your team not doing anything throughout the entire match. Offense heroes are great for pushing objectives, defense heroes are great for choking an objective, and Symmetra does neither of these things effectively by herself. If she was categorized as a standard DPS, she'd be the most underpowered DPS in the game due to her limitations and vast amounts of weaknesses. To me, she works as an assistant. Her teleporter reduces team downtime, her generator improves team sustainability, her turrets reduce mobility, and her projector adds as a bonus to another teammate's combat encounter and weakens a team in the midst of chaos. She sets out to do what the support class is for, which is providing the utility to aid other players whilst not being particularly strong on her own. But with all of that said, I'm not going to sit here and say that Symmetra is a perfectly balanced class that's all roses, but when I delve into the issues surrounding Symmetra in fundamentals and balancing, I don't think it's her fault. I think it's Overwatch's fault. The biggest underlying issue that I think applies for all heroes of Overwatch is I don't think Blizzard have a clear-cut vision on what they want each hero to do or be like. There's no definitive end goal that the developers want to reach for other than keeping players happy with their personal balancing preferences. There's 24 heroes, potentially more on the way, each one with a unique kit and name that falls under a role that, if Symmetra is any indication, is vague and can be broken through minor technicalities. Yes, I hate that I have to bring this up too, but I'll have to compare this to how the classes are constructed in class-based games like Team Fortress 2, where each character has a set-in-stone role. The sniper is for sniping, the spy is for stealth, the medic is for explicitly healing, and each class is categorized by fans as a generalist for all scenarios and a specialist for specific duties. When a class is rebalanced, for the most part they're rebalanced around their role. Spy to the average player might come across as situational and extremely difficult to play as, but that's because he's a specialist that does his own personal job extremely effectively at the cost of not doing other jobs as well. He's low tier, but that's okay because he was designed to be low tier. Overwatch isn't as clear-cut in this case, with nearly every hero feeling like a confusing mass of generalist and specialist, making it really difficult to isolate what the actual issues are with the hero, what's just personal preference, and what potential changes actually need to be made for the good of their role. Take Diva for instance. When I first played Diva in the open beta, she was a sub-tank with high mobility, a personal barrier, and infinite ammo cannons that only deal damage at mid to close range. From that kit alone, I interpreted Diva as a pest that is supposed to harass the front lines or overextend, while the rest of her team go in for the actual push. So, if we base Diva's balancing around that interpretation, one needs to ask the following later on in Overwatch's life. Why was her health nerfed if she's a head hitbox with legs that's supposed to be at the front lines? Why was her defense matrix nerfed if her health was nerfed earlier and she now has very few defensive options to keep doing her role? Why does she have a new offensive ability in the PTR when her existing kit implied that she's not a heavy hitter? It feels like Blizzard tried to make every hero a one-size-fits-all generalist that appeals to all players, but considering the variety in weapons, abilities, and just the amount of heroes to play as, I'm sorry, but that's just not possible. Moving back to Symmetra, it almost feels like Blizzard forgot she was a support builder. In her December buff, the shield generator, barrier, and turret buff were more than enough to improve her viability in her specialist role. But why buff the photon projector's range if it was perfectly fine and filled the purpose of a support weapon that leaves Symmetra in close-up peril at all times? I don't wish to make irrational accusations, but with the presentation of each hero and their lack of synergy in relation to others, it feels like Blizzard don't have an idea of what they want a future Overwatch to be like, and knowing the developer's vision of the perfect competitive game is needed to make the game fun, accessible, and above all, fair. But hey, let's get out of yelling at Blizzard and move back to positives. When all of this heavily opinionated information is stacked up, why do I consider myself a Symmetra main, and why exactly have I clocked 60 hours and counting as her? Ultimately, she's a very unique hero compared to the rest of the roster, and she emphasizes many factors that I love so much about shooters. If this and my Splatoon video are any indication, I fancy myself somewhat of a tactician, even if I'm not the best at it. I like studying maps, I like discussing balancing, I like spotting trends in statistics, and above all, I like implementing my knowledge to ensure that my team make it home safe. Symmetra feels like a specialist hero that rewards knowledge, experience, and methodology. The healers in the game have a more dynamic and generalist playstyle where their positioning, healing target, and pursuing enemies could occur and change at any time. But with Symmetra, I play for the idea of a thankless job that makes me feel like a puppeteer pulling all the strings, which is ultimately the kick that support mains get out of all of their favourite shooters. And that's what I have to say about Symmetra and Overwatch's use of class roles. Of course, you're free to make an input, and if you disagree with my view, that's fine if you're willing to respect me on the matter. I hope you found this video informative, or at least entertaining. God knows I could work on the two factors, but just acknowledge that we sim mains are people too, you know? There's more to us than holding left click and setting up a teleporter. Sometimes we like to laugh at Genji mains when they try to deflect the beam. Trust me, it gets me every time. Shit's hilarious. One day, my friend. One day.